Now we're ready to actually start weaving on our board, and I can either find a shuttle already wrapped with a color that I want to use and just take that one from the shuttle bucket, or I may not find the color I want to use on a shuttle, so in that case I'm going to wrap my own shuttle. So to do that I'm going to take an empty shuttle, the color that I want. I'm going to start with the end of the yarn and my thumb holding down the end of that yarn. I'm going to wrap over that yarn or that shuttle a few times. Then I'm going to gently pull my thumb out, trying to keep that end tucked underneath so it doesn't start to come out and get confused with the other end. And then I'm going to wrap that shuttle around and around and around until it's about that thick. I could go a little bit bigger if I want to. Keep in mind that if your shuttle gets too thick, it becomes harder to pass through in between your warp strings. So it's about this thick right now. Here's the top view, and then I'm just going to cut that, and of course every time I'm done with a ball of yarn I'm going to tape the end to make sure that we don't have a huge knot starting to form in our bucket. So now that I'm ready to start weaving with a shuttle, I'm going to start by unwrapping a tail, at least long enough to go through one time, and then I'm going to weave holding the shuttle end, not the tail end. Okay, that's important. So weaving with the shuttle end, I'm going to not weave way up to the top because it'll be harder to pass my shuttle through, so I'm going to weave about halfway down, and the tabby weave is what we're using, and that is the simplest weave, the over one, under one, over one, under one, repeat all the way through till you get to the end of your board. Now once I'm at the end I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail here. That's going to stay there throughout the time that I'm working on the board. Once it comes off the board then we can get rid of those little tails. The important thing to remember is that if I ended over I need to start my next line going under. If I don't do that I'm not hooking onto this end warp string, which means my whole line will end up pulling out. So I will show you in just a minute what that's going to look like. Now, every time you complete a line, please make sure that you don't pull so hard that your warp strings are starting to cave in. We call that choking. You don't want your weaving to choke. You want it to be, your warp strings to be straight up and down so that it can breathe. So you want these warp strings to stay as vertical as possible, straight up and down. Okay. Now, what I was just saying, what happens if I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing and I end up starting my new line the same way that I ended the line before. So I ended over the line, so now I started the new line also going over, and I weaved just a few lines here. So now watch what happens when I start pulling. That whole line's going to come out because I didn't hook around the end by alternating over versus under. Okay. Last but not least, let's say that I ran out of warp string, or ran out of yarn halfway through a line. I don't want you to tie a knot with your new yarn and continue going. You don't want this big knot in the middle. Instead, just pull that line out and maybe trim this off so it's not quite so long. And then I'm going to start a new line on the end. So your ends, you always start a new line on the edges of your board, okay? And that's how you start a new color as well. If you want to start a new color, finish up on one of the sides, either the left or the right, cut your yarn, and then start your shuttle again on the side. Okay. At the end of the hour, if your shuttle is connected like this and you're in the middle of weaving, you're going to simply wrap up your shuttle so there's not a long string connected. You want to try to keep your shuttle close to the board. Just skip over to the middle of your board and just go over, under, over, and then tuck that shuttle up to hold it in nice and tight so that it doesn't fall out. If you just slip it under a few strings,